Oh, I guess you're only familiar with the new Batman movies. Michelle Pfeiffer. Ha. The only true Catwoman is Julie Newmar, Lee Merriweather, or Eartha Kitt. And I didn't need molded plastic to improve my physique. Pure West.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans, brought to you by thatshelf.com. Each week, we pick a movie parodied on The Simpsons. Maybe it was The Simpsons that introduced us to the film, or maybe when we finally saw it, we realized, well, hey, that's where that Simpson joke came from. Regardless, each week we pick one that one of us hasn't seen or hasn't seen in a while, watch it, and come together to discuss. I'm your host, Adam Scholes, and joining me as always is the Burt Ward to my Adam West, or the Adam West to my Burt Ward. I don't know which one of us gets to be Batman, but my co-host, Nate Storing. How you doing today, Caped Crusader?
I guess I'm Batman then. Yeah, holy nostalgia, Batman. I'm having a good time revisiting the Adam West Batman. It's really taken me back to my childhood.
Totally. Well, and we're joined today by a very special guest. He's the co-host of the Spoiled Rotten podcast and one of T-Dot's finest. It's Daniel Grant. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. This is great. Thank you for that intro, by the way. That was fun.
Well, Daniel, both Nate and I were on your show talking about Batman, so it seemed appropriate to bring you onto our show to talk about Batman.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and you guys still have to come back for another Batman movie. So
yes, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to knock it all out.
Oh, I can't wait. We're trying something a little different this season. We're actually kicking off a Batman double feature. So this week, we're going to be talking about Batman the movie from 1966, and then next week, we're going to be talking about Batman from 1989. But we're here to talk about Batman the movie, which you might remember from such Simpson episodes as Season 1's There's No Disgrace Like Home, Season 2's Three Men in a Comic Book, Season 3's Separate Vocations and Black Widower, Season 4's Mr. Plow, I Love Lisa, and Last Exit to Springfield. Buckle up, we're not even halfway through yet. Season 5's The Boy Who Knew Too Much, Season 7's Radioactive Man, Home Sweet Home Diddly Dum Doodly, and Bart on the Road. Season 8's, oh geez, I'm not even going to attempt the Spanish pronunciation. I'm just going with
El Viaje Misterioso de Nuestro Homer, I think.
That sounds accurate. The Mysterious Voyage of Homer. Season 9's Lisa's Sax and the Joy of Sect. Season 11's Beyond Blunderdome and Treehouse of Horror 10. And Season 13, The Bart Wants What It Wants. That's a lot of Batman references.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is one of those weird ones where, you know, obviously this is a TV show and there's a movie. And so there's a lot of references that are in both.
Right.
And it's the same with Star Trek. It's the same with a couple of these other heavy hitters on the show. But I feel like it's fair game to include this movie in our database. And if you do, then it's like one of the most referenced movies on The Simpsons.
Yeah, easily. Based on that list alone, that does not surprise me. And it stands to reason that this show and or movie would have been highly influential on the writers, considering, you know, the timeline and everything. But before we get started with all that, Daniel, I want to know, like, what's your history with The Simpsons?
I love The Simpsons. It's one of those things where you would use it as social currency at school. Like, yeah, I can get in on referencing The Simpsons. Let's do that. Like, let's be friends by just quoting The Simpsons at each other. And I do think that it had a huge influence on my sense of humor.
Is there a movie that you watched and then, you know, as we sort of say in the intro, like, had that epiphany of like, oh, that's where that Simpson joke came from? Is there something that like comes to mind for you?
Right now, I think it's just the Lord of the Flies episode, but like a bunch of there's so many. There's just so many. Like, it's because I had my mom sitting there saying in real time, "Oh, that's from this." There wasn't a lot of me self-discovery. It would just be like my mom being like, "I guess you can watch this. This seems to be referencing a lot of interesting things."
That's so interesting. Cool. So your mom watched the show with you, because there's definitely like, I had friends who straight up were not allowed to watch The Simpsons.
Me too.
And then I was allowed to watch The Simpsons, and my dad liked it, but I don't know that we really watched it together. Maybe in the early years, and then it kind of became my show. But he definitely didn't. I didn't have that experience of him sort of like coaching me and being like, "Oh, you know what that's from?" But that's super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising actually for your dad, Adam, because I feel like he introduced you to a lot of stuff that The Simpsons totally parodies.
Yeah.
But,
Again, I think it was just that when we watched the show together, I was so young that it wouldn't have mattered. Like, I don't think I started making those connections probably until like high school, when I was then into movies and like willing to look into all of this stuff. When I would have been watching it with my dad, it would have been when it was like first airing. So I would have been like 4 or 5 years old. So all of that stuff, like, it wouldn't even have mattered. He could have been like, well, that's from this. And I would be like, I don't know what a movie is. So
yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we start tucking into this episode? Because this is a great episode that we've chosen to talk about tonight. So we're going to be talking about Radioactive Man, which is season 7, episode 2, directed by Susie Dieter and written by, guess who? John Schwartzwalder. Nate, we really at some point need to like do a tally of how many episodes we've covered have been written by him, because I think like it's got to be like at least 80%.
It's a lot. Which, you know, I mean, he wrote like not 80% of all Simpsons episodes, but a lot of them. So
arguably 80% of the best ones, certainly.
Maybe, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd just be curious, like if he is the writer that pound for pound has the most movie references, and that's why we keep picking them, or if it's just like a weird fluke because we love these episodes. I don't know, but
I actually do have an answer to that question.
Oh,
but
okay.
I will look it up and get back to you.
Okay, great. Well, in the meantime, I will let you know that this originally aired on September 24th, 1995. Its guest stars were Mickey Rooney as himself and Phil Hartman as both Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, two of Nate's absolute favorite Simpsons characters. Daniel, do you remember the first time you saw this episode?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, I like superhero stuff. So I was like, oh, my goodness, yeah, they're doing a superhero movie. I was aware of the Batman references because that's the Batman I would watch. So when there was like the camp counselor guy being like, don't forget to use your nails. And I think I quoted that to my sister so much she would just hate it. But I remember watching it, but like most Bart stories, just being so sad that things don't work out for him.
That's
like,
true, eh?
This and the Itchy and Scratchy movie episode just like break my heart every time. It's like, I can't believe he didn't get to watch it and quote it to his friends until he was like an old man.
Totally. Before we move on, I have an answer. It's Dan McGrath has the most references of any Simpsons writer who's done more than one episode.
Interesting.
Right, because there's lots of one-off writers, but that's not really fair. But he has an average of 12.3 references per episode. Damn. And he's done 4 episodes.
Wow.
Okay. Interesting.
So,
I mean,
there you go.
I do think, as we've sort of learned from our conversations with people involved in the show, that maybe the movie references tend to get put in at the table or by like, because, you know, there's a credited writer, but the room sort of works on it as a whole. So it's maybe not necessarily fair to credit any one writer with the references, but either way, that is interesting to know. Nate, what about you? What's your memory of this episode?
Yeah, it's a good question. It blurs together because I've seen some of these earlier ones in syndication like a bazillion times.
Yeah,
and I don't necessarily remember seeing this like when it aired, but I just have watched it so many times. And I think, you know, you've commented that you've said this about like every episode we've watched. But like this is probably in my top 5 of just like, you know, there are some sequences in this that are just incredible joke machines, right?
Absolutely.
Like the audition scene, right? when they go on set, like both of those sequences are just joke after joke after joke, and with like some of my favorite characters coming on, and just, oh my God. I love this episode so much. I think I have it pretty much memorized.
Yeah, rewatching it just before we recorded, I was doing the thing I shouldn't be doing, which is like kind of half watching it, because I was like, I really should be paying attention because we're about to talk about it. But it's just, I know it so well that I didn't feel like, I knew I could like glance at my phone every once in a while to like answer an email or whatever, because I was like, well, I've seen this a million times. Which is why I want to bring up how I fondly remember this, Nate. And I texted you this as I was watching it. So, Daniel, for a little bit of context, Nate and I went to high school together. That's how we know each other. So we've been friends for like over 15 years. And one of the things that we did in high school was we made short films together. We were in film class together. And we're going to talk about this later in this season. We're going to very specifically talk about this. But we were making a short film and we were shooting it in and around Nate's like parents' place. So we all stayed overnight for the weekend at Nate's parents' place. And I brought with me my season 7 DVD of The Simpsons. And so we ended up watching a bunch of episodes that then became recurring gags as we were shooting our short film. And I think that's probably why I brought this season, because it was like, we're going to make a movie. We should watch the Simpson episode where they're making a movie. And I remember, Nate, I don't know if you remember this, but we quoted the like, starving them, teasing them, singing off key. Hey, I know you. Donuts, I got no. Like, so we were quoting a lot from 22 short films about Springfield. But the other thing that we quoted all the time was
again and again and again and again and again.
We've got to do the Jiminy Jillikers scene again, Millhouse.
But we already did it. It took 7 hours, but we did it. It's done.
Yes, but we've got to do it from different angles. Again and again. And again and again and again.
Yeah, exactly. And so when that line came up, rewatching it tonight, I had this like immediate flashback where I was like, I'm on set with my best friends making this movie, and we're just saying, we need to do it again and again, again and again and again and again. So anyway, that's probably my most like vivid memory of this episode, is just like us watching it. And also, this is one of those episodes where between There's Your Answer Fishbulb and The Goggles Do Nothing are probably my two most quoted Simpsons quotes in real life, which always get like weird reactions from people, but like every once in a while I'll say it and someone gets what I'm referencing, and then they like give me a knowing sort of like chuckle or whatever, and I'm like, okay, we're on the same page. So
my eyes, the goggles do nothing.
That social currency is still alive and well.
Those two quotes are great from episodes I love. So great. Great stuff.
Well, so let's talk about the actual reference to Batman in this episode. I was sort of excited about doing this double feature of these two movies, mostly because of this episode, because this episode is kind of all about the relationship between Batman 1966 and Batman 1989.
Right? Totally.
What does it mean to do like a superhero blockbuster reboot thing? And what are we trying to run away from like the past? And so this episode, it obviously has a direct Batman 66 parody of it with the Scoutmaster and all of that and the flashback, which is great. And also the other sort of direct reference, of course, is Fall Out Boy too, right? Because the Tim Burton 1989 Batman doesn't have Robin in it.
Yeah.
So the idea of having this like, sidekick with a stupid catchphrase is very much more a reference, I think, to like the 1966 Batman.
Yeah,
definitely.
I've said Jiminy Jilliker so many times the words have lost all meaning.
Well, and it's interesting too, because of course the other thing that I think is important to put into the context of when this show is airing is that obviously Nate and I, when we were kids, like the Adam West series was running on YTV. And so that was sort of like one way you could get into Batman. The Tim Burton movies are running, then the Adam West show is airing, but then also too, Batman the Animated Series has started. And I think 1994, if I'm not mistaken, that might be the same year Mask of the Phantasm comes out, or maybe it came out the year before. Either way, the animated series is certainly part of the sort of cultural context of when this episode is coming out, which is interesting because, of course, Robin in that show is not the obnoxious sort of holy, whatever Batman. I can't come up with a good Robin phrase, but like Robin is a little more grounded and likable in that show. But you're right, Nate. Like it is sort of funny how this couldn't be more the antithesis of what they ultimately ended up doing with Robin in the Burton movies, which was just like completely eliminate him. So
yeah, but I feel like the actual direct reference to the 60s Batman show is pretty good in this for the most part. Like it captures some of the key elements of just, the Dutch angles and the like themed bad guys, with their like costumes.
Silly themed bad guys. Yeah.
Billowing backpacks, radioactive man. It's the worst villain of them all. The Scoutmaster.
Go get 'em, Scouts.
Yeah, and like making fires with sticks. Like that felt true to life.
Don't be afraid to use your nails, boys.
The Paul Lynde thing is, dated.
But accurate to the type of guest stars that were on Batman 66, like the TV series.
Right, and kind of gets to something we'll talk a lot more about later, I think, but just the whole campiness, right? And
Yeah.
What is camp and, like all of that sort of stuff, and why are they trying to run away from it with Batman 1989? Like, that's a whole kettle of fish.
Well, I especially like that they take the time to add a dance sequence because, of course, that famously there were multiple dance sequences in the 66 series, which is just so bizarre, but
that caused a dance craze.
Yeah.
But I think Batman sings a song about a woman he accidentally kills in one of the early episodes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's
I
like,
didn't know that. I love
like
that.
it's some song about Miranda. Like he didn't trust her, and he got her killed, and he sings this song. I'm like, wow, they just really went for it in this show.
Would you like to see me make my muscles dance, Miranda?
Wow. That's wild.
I shouldn't be laughing. A woman died, but the show is just so ridiculous.
Another thing that they get right, I feel like, in that scene is like the POW cards, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which are, of course, a beloved part of the show, but they also have like sort of Simpsons, what would you call it? Like trivia hidden in them?
Yeah, like in jokes.
One of them's Bort, isn't it?
Yeah, one of them is Bort, of Bort license plates fame at Itchy and Scratchy Land. The other one that's a pretty deep cut is Snuh, which
That's a great reference.
Yep, which is from the episode Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, where Marge starts a citizens group called Springfieldians for Non-Violence, Understanding, and Helping, or SNUH for short.
Oh, is that what? See, I thought it was a
I thought it
reference
was
to
the Homer thing.
Yeah, the Lisa's pony.
Oh.
Yeah, when he's like, promise me you're not going to get a pony. And
because he starts making sounds.
What was that? Was that a yes or a no?
Huh.
Those aren't even words.
Sneh.
So it's a double reference. That's really funny.
Oh, nice. I like that. And then they just have one that says mint, which I thought was funny.
Daniel, do you have a favorite moment from this episode?
I do think it's, oh my goodness, we have our Fallout Boy, is what I would say if you went an inch too slow.
Yeah, that is really good.
And then everything Bart does to get taller is just seared into my brain.
Run, you mighty stallions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that his tall outfit makes me laugh so hard.
I've gained that inch and then some.
Yeah. I love how many good sign gags are in this. Like, this is definitely an episode that benefits from like being on DVD or Disney Plus, so you can pause and read like all the hilarious signs. Our extra patients make patient extras in front of the hospital.
That's a good one. I think I missed that this time. I
think
there's
the first time I saw that one.
Yeah, there is a lot to take in this. That's for sure. A joke that like they telegraph, but I always miss it because I think I never quite catch the mistake. But when they say, "Look at that ad," they don't need a lot of room or correct spelling, because I'm always like, "Oh, the gag's coming up," and then I look and I'm like, "Well, Springfield is spelled correctly," but I always forget that its film is spelled Flim.
So, fun fact about Flim Springfield. That is the name of another podcast that has the same premise as ours, but has ended.
Oh, there we go.
I think they maybe did it during the pandemic, and they only did a few episodes, but it's called Flim Springfield. So there you go.
Okay. Well, we had the idea first. Maybe,
I don't know. Maybe
we did do that.
You had the idea last.
Yeah, we had. Well, we had
the idea last.
We have an unaired pilot that will never see the light of day, so maybe we'll say that came first. But yeah, okay.
There you go.
The thing that's interesting about this episode too, obviously, is that like it kind of goes against our premise in the sense that I don't think any of us were introduced to Batman from this episode. I'm assuming.
No.
Right?
No, not to Batman, but you know, what I will say, again, we're going to come back to this later, but I was introduced to the idea of camp through The Simpsons.
Fair enough. Yeah,
and that's very relevant to this movie. So there you go.
I might have been introduced to Mickey Rooney through this, though.
I definitely was. Definitely. I had no idea who he was.
I was a weird kid who I definitely knew who Mickey Rooney was, but I would say,
what did you know Mickey Rooney from?
Because he made all the Judy Garland musicals.
Yeah, he was around. It's just I hadn't seen any of them. And
well, no, I don't think I
his voice.
Neither did I.
Yeah, no, I don't. Well, and also like
Daniel and I were normal kids.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh, it's far from normal.
I will blame my grandfather because he loved The Wizard of Oz and like got me into like all this stuff. So he would have watched like the Jack Benny show and all this like esoteric 50s entertainment. So when I would be in Peterborough at my grandfather's house, I'm sure that's how Mickey Rooney came up. But no, what I was going to say that I was introduced to is probably Waterworld. Like, that when they do that sequence from the movie, it's supposed to be a Waterworld parody. Although they said, I was reading a trivia fact today that this episode came out before Waterworld actually had been released, or at least it would have been in production before it was released. So they were basically parodying the trailer and then all of the bad press that Waterworld was getting. Right. But that's what that like scene where they're hanging upside down in the cage is meant to be like a reference to Waterworld, which I still haven't seen, but I'm certainly familiar with.
They do that more than I realized. Like, they reference Waterworld, they reference Titanic, I believe, before it comes out. They reference The Phantom Menace before it comes out, too.
Oh.
At least they were writing it before it came out. So they're like only referencing trailers or merchandise or news or that kind of stuff and not the movie itself. So, you know, it's like they probably would have been a lot harder on Waterworld after it came out, to be honest.
Yeah.
The other movie reference that I didn't pick up on until this viewing was when Homer's talking to the director. He first meets him and he's like, aren't you that guy who directed Unnatural Discretion?
Right.
And I was like, I feel like I only now got like, oh, okay, that's like a Fatal Attraction / Presumed Innocence / Basic Instinct / Indecent Proposal reference.
Yeah.
Of just like all those movies that had the same damn title that I totally still get mixed up to this day.
Some of them are good. Some of them are not so good. The Basic Instinct is good. Nate and I will argue about this time ad nauseum, but I think Basic Instinct is a great movie.
I think I just don't like the genre.
That's valid. That's valid. One of the things, too, that I wanted to point out, which I'm sure was immediately apparent when you pulled this episode up, was that this was the very first episode that they digitally colored. So that's why it kind of looks a little weird. And I think kind of suffers. Like we've talked about this. The two things that I find very sort of hard to get into the modern version of The Simpsons is the like how modern it looks, like the fact that it's in widescreen and it's digitally inked now, and the fact that the cast also sounds like they're 30 years old, which they are 30 years older. But yeah, so this was the first episode that was digitally inked, and then I guess they made the switch to fully digital late season 14, which is, you know, actually where we sort of are setting our arbitrary like cutoff point at season 13. So we hopefully will not have to deal with this too much more, but
yeah. One of the things that they always talk about on the commentary is like they're kind of miffed that like all of these older seasons have, they call it like a halo. It's a little shadow underneath some of the characters because when you have lots of layers of cells on top of each other, then they literally are just casting a shadow when you photograph them. And I love that. I think it adds a lot to the show. And like, even when we were putting our website together, this is really dorky, but I added one of those halos. If you're looking really carefully, it's under the menu. There's a little bit of a shadow like that's modeled after those. But, you know, I love those little details. It makes it feel more tactile. And I agree when you look at like the newer seasons, even the proportions don't quite look right. And I think it's because of that kind of stuff where it's like the pupils look a little smaller, even though they're probably technically following the same guidelines. But like maybe it's just because the lines were imperfect or whatever, you know?
I think it's in like the first and second season. If you look at the backgrounds, I think they did like airbrushing or whatever, because there's very prominent like gradients in the colors, which sort of start to go away after the first couple. But yeah, I love that sort of actual tactility, and it gives everything a little more character that I feel like the solid colors doesn't. And the weird thing, of course, is that like other modern shows like Bob's Burgers or even Futurama that started in that digital era, like it doesn't bother me at all. It's just because I'm used to The Simpsons looking one way, the shift is like very sort of like off-putting or whatever. But
for sure. Does anyone have any other favorite parts of this episode? I have like a list that is too long to go through all of it, but yeah.
Hit us with your top 3 highlights that you really want to cover. Because we could really talk about this episode for the entire duration of this, and I do want to get into the movie, so.
Totally. Okay, so, Spirograph Factory. Dr. S. That is just the most strange, out of left field thing. Again, feels like it maybe is a movie reference or something, but like it's totally unclear what it is. Maybe it's a Back to the Future thing, or maybe it's just like a completely random John Swartzwelder thing.
Yeah.
The TV flipping gag.
Oh, I love that.
Where it's like,
F one is talking about ready active and y'all.
The extra syllable gets me every time. I always forget it's there.
Did you catch the cameo in that?
No. Who's the cameo?
I think it's one of either the last or the second last TV flip is to Conan. It's Conan's show because they would have done the episode where Bart gets famous. I think either probably the season before or whatever. So they reuse that animation. So Conan has a brief, it's not his voice. It's very clearly not his voice, but it is the animation of Conan on his show.
Good catch. And then this one's probably not a favorite, but it's a question for you, Adam. Why the hell do you think they include Prince in the montage of all the people going online to talk about the movie?
Yeah, so I thought that they addressed this in the commentary, and then I listened to it, and I don't know. I don't think they did. There's a part of me that wants to say it's sort of a nod to the fact that Prince does the Batman soundtrack, but I think it's also just, I could be completely off base, but I think it was like Prince was maybe like one of those artists who had a website early, like maybe he was like super technologically literate.
I don't really online.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it doesn't seem like something he would be because he's like such an enigma and a recluse. But I guess maybe that's part of the joke, is the idea that like this very, very mysterious reclusive pop star happens to also be on alt.nerd.obsessive, which is funny.
That's definitely how I took the joke, that like people will be like, yeah, he did the Batman soundtrack, but also it's funny that if you didn't know that, just like, oh, it's funny that Prince would care about this. Like, who's gonna play
it does seem like he'd be the kind of guy to have like a secret internet account to like talk up Prince albums and be like, no, that one's good.
Yeah.
Crystal Ball is actually a really good album. That was my deep pull of Prince knowledge. Crystal Ball, look it up.
I mean, yeah, I just thought it was funny given that we have like a long tangent about Prince coming up in our Batman 89 episode. So
yes, we've recorded these out of order, so we do know that we're doing that. So just you have that to look forward to. Yes, very good reference. There you go. Daniel, is there anything else from the episode you really wanted to chat about?
I do like the joke that Springfield is taking advantage of these Hollywood
yes, I do.
I do like throughout that they're like, we just want to make a good story. We just want to tell a good story, and he's like, it's gonna be $1,000 for that. Like,
the puffy pants tax.
I was gonna. That is
wearing puffy pants.
I meant I'm not wearing puffy pants.
Yeah. Thank God we're back in Hollywood where people treat each other right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like rainbows and everything. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, anytime Quimby is revealed to be the scumbag that he is always nice.
For sure.
Okay, shall we tuck into the film?
Let's do it.
All right, so Daniel, we're going to put you on the spot a little bit, but we always like to ask our guest if they can sum up the movie in a sentence.
4 of Batman's supervillains get together in an effort to kill Batman, but also use this new device from this rich guy on a yacht.
Yeah, it is. This plot, it is so goddamn convoluted.
I wanted to be a lot more facetious, but I decided I'll just state the facts. These are things that happen, but I have some issues with how things play out.
Yeah, okay, well, great. We could get into that. What is your background with this movie? Like, did you watch it as a kid? Did you come to it later in life?
So I always watched the Batman series, the like 60s Adam West one, before the animated show came out. Mm-hmm. That was how I watched Batman. And as a kid, I don't think I understood it was a comedy until my mom sitting there was like, it is funny. This is supposed to be funny.
Right.
I thought like, why is he acting like that? And I was like, oh, okay, like that was wasted opportunity to enjoy the humor there. But I have seen parts of the movie, and I always thought I'd seen the movie until I watched it last night. And I was like, I don't remember a lot of this stuff. So like, I guess I never watched this movie. But in my head, if you had asked me, I'd be like, yeah, I've seen it a bunch of times. And I'm just like watching, I was like, I don't remember a lot of this.
Mm-hmm. I had a very similar experience, Daniel.
Oh, interesting.
Like, oh yeah, I've totally seen this. 100%. Yeah. Must have seen it. I don't know whether or not I saw this before or not, because it's like, it's not something I ever owned on DVD. It's not something I ever rented. It probably was on TV a bunch of times, so it's possible that I saw it in that context. But like, I don't know if I would have even known that it was the movie and not just like an episode or whatever, or a couple episodes back to back with commercial breaks, right? So I'm like, I don't know if I saw this before.
Okay. So
I think I probably did.
I have
don't know.
like strong memories of the bomb and like the villains on the yacht and the helicopter and the shark. Like all of that is like in my head as I've seen this movie. But then when I watched it, there was all these things in between those things. I was like, oh, maybe I haven't seen this movie.
You didn't remember the whole dehydration plot?
No, 100% I did not. That is something that was completely new to me.
I didn't really either.
Wow. Okay. So I have the exact opposite experience because not only did I own this movie on DVD, I also owned it on VHS. Nice. And remember renting it as a child before I owned it on VHS. So I got into Batman because I was flipping through TV after school one day, and the opening credits for Batman, the TV series, was on YTV because they were running it on YTV. And I saw my name. I saw Adam West. And I was like, hey, that's my name. And when you're 5 years old and you see your name on TV, you're like, I got to watch this. And then I was instantly hooked. So I fell in love with the show then. Remember going to, again, this would have been like pre-Blockbuster. It was like going to the weird like independent video rental store near my dad's office and renting the movie in one of those like hard plastic cases.
Oh, I know.
So it was like the original like CBS VHS release. Then it was re-released on VHS, and my dad bought it for me at Costco because that's where he bought all of our VHSs back in the day. And then when I was in like end of grade school or start of high school, it got released on DVD, and I got it for my birthday because my dad knew that I loved the show. So like I watched this a lot as a kid, and rewatching it, remembered so much of it to the point where I was like finding the movie kind of a chore to watch because I was like, I know what's coming. Like there was no surprises. There was nothing like new to me. It was just like a weird nostalgic boredom that I had watching this, which we'll unpack a little bit later maybe. But yeah, so I definitely watched this a lot, but I guess I was the only one. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the show a lot, but clearly I had not seen this movie in full.
Fascinating. Okay. Well, to that point, I pulled up the synopsis from the VHS that I had as a kid. And
nice.
Let me tell you, this is something to behold. I guess I should do it in my best William Dozier narrator voice.
Yes, thou must.
Holy heart failure! Batman and Robin are caught in the greatest crisis of their crime-fighting careers. Every infamous villain in Gotham City has teamed up to put the Caped Crusader and Boy Wonder out of commission forever. Now the dynamic duo has to ice the Penguin, heckle the Jekyll,
Heckle the Jekyll,
heckle the Joker, tongue-tie the Riddler, and declaw Catwoman all at once. It won't be easy, especially with this colorful band of criminals has created a secret invention that dehydrates people and is already wreaking havoc at the UN.
I can't even get through this.
It's high-flying, gadget-packed, criminally crazy fun and adventure with an all-star cast that includes Adam West, Burt Ward, Burgess Meredith, Cesar Romero, Frank Gorshin, and the delightfully devilish Lee Merriweather.
I mean, again, to your point, Daniel, like you're just dropping hard, cold facts, but that does not do justice to how convoluted this movie is.
No,
they didn't even mention the invisible yacht.
The invisible, yeah. They didn't mention
That's
that.
where we start.
Yeah, Catwoman goes undercover as a Russian journalist. Miss Kitka.
Yeah. Kitka, which is an acronym.
Yeah. Oh. Well, because she says her name, and then they're just like, it's Kitka.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so do you want some context for how this all comes to happen?
Please, explain how this exists.
Okay. I did actually find this really interesting because obviously, I can't remember what episode we talked about it, Nate, but I said, like, it boggles the mind that it took until the late 80s for someone to be like, hey, you know what would make a good movie? Batman. That character feels like it's something that would make for a great movie, but you have to remember that sort of like the comic books in the like 50s and 60s got a little silly, and then this show comes along, and then that really sort of poisons the well for many years. So how this all came about was that, believe it or not, Hugh Hefner is involved. So what happens was, in the early 60s, he organizes a screening of several of the original Batman serials from the 1940s. So there were, much like there were the Buck Rogers and like all this stuff, there was a series of Batman serials. They're like really cheesy. I tried watching them at one point and they are borderline unwatchable. Like Batman, his outfit is comical. Like it's just made out of like felt. So like his ears are constantly flopping. Like it's so silly. But the buzz from this screening was like so hot that Columbia decides to re-release the serials in theaters, and they do like gangbusters. Like everybody is rushing to see these things. So that sort of kicks up this notion that maybe we should like try and do something with this IP. And meanwhile, like I think CBS and ABC were already looking into buying the rights to Batman. So this sort of like spurred that on. So they end up doing that, and it's produced by this executive, William Dozier, who is the narrator on all the episodes. That like famous voice is the producer. And he describes it as the only situational comedy on the air without a laugh track.
Which is interesting because The Simpsons kind of actually takes up that mantle a little bit in the sort of late 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
Because like even the Flintstones has a laugh track, doesn't it?
Yep.
They do.
Yeah.
Yep. And the Jetsons, like a lot of those Hanna-Barbera cartoons have laugh tracks.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. So basically Dozier decides he's going to make this show. He also brings in this guy, Lorenzo Semple Jr., who is sort of like responsible for doing a lot of the writing. And he's the guy who wrote the movie. One of them has never actually read the comics. And when they do, they realize, oh, this is bad. We can't do this seriously. Like, we can't just put this on screen. The only way it was going to work was to make it like pop art, campy comedy. So they had to sort of like lean into that sensibility because, again, this is at the period where I don't know how deep everybody is in their Batman lore, but like Batmite existed, right? Like this is peak ridiculous Batman. So they just realized if we were to do this seriously, like we would never last. We have to do this all very tongue in cheek.
But it is also like, to your point, it's not just Batman, it's like superheroes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like,
this is
pre-Superman, the movie, right?
Yep. Yep, like Spider-Man has all these things are like they're for children. Like at the end of the day, it's stuff for children to buy for 5 cents.
That can't be forgotten.
Yeah, exactly. So, which I think gets lost today in the sort of narrative around comic books, and they have to be taken seriously. And like, yes, there is serious stuff, but like they all started as just like, we're going to sell these things to kids.
Yeah, and also, like, even when you look at more contemporary superhero movies, they still spend a lot of time trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we adapt this in a way that the general public who doesn't read comic books will accept it, right?
Yeah.
And in the 90s, we go the other direction of, like, instead of being bright and colorful and comedic, we have to be really serious and stripped down and, like, no costumes and all that. And even, like, Batman 89, again, we'll talk about it later, but, like, it goes deep into like, oh, well, maybe if it's like an old school like monster movie drawing from like early cinema, maybe then people will take it seriously.
Yeah.
And so it's like they're always kind of wrestling with like, well, how do we adapt this in a way that people will accept it? And this goes really hard in one direction.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that they also take from those early serials is this cliffhanger format. And this was the first show to air on 2 consecutive nights in prime time because ABC was originally going to air it as like a 1 hour slot, but then they realized, well, we have a half hour on Wednesday, we have a half hour on Thursday. We could air it sort of like on back-to-back nights and like lean into this serialized format. And certainly like as a kid, that was one of the things that I was super invested in was the fact
that's
that
what
like,
I liked as well.
Yeah,
I liked that it was like, oh yeah, and tomorrow I'll find out what happens.
Yeah, YTV, I think they did air 2 episodes back-to-back, but they always did it so it was like you would get part 2 and then part 1 of the next episode. So it was like you would wait until the next day to find out how Batman would get out of his jam, which is very clever programming. So what's really interesting though, and I was mistaken about this, but so the film comes out July 30th of 1966, 2 months after the finale of the first season. Originally, this was supposed to be sort of a backdoor pilot. They were going to make the movie to sell the show. But what ended up happening was the show was just greenlit so quickly. And they were like, you need to start right away. And we're going to start airing in January. So they're like, okay, well, we don't have time to make a movie. So they're just like, we'll make the show and then we'll deal with the movie later. Because they wanted to make the movie so A, that they could like get bigger and badder gadgets, like the Bat Cycle, the Bat Copter, all that stuff. But also they were like, instead of using it to sell it to Americans, we can sell it internationally. We can air the movie in Europe and then they'll buy the series, hopefully.
Right.
But they didn't need to do that because the show was such a huge success. It was already selling out. So they were just like, well, we might as well just make this movie. We can cash in on Batmania, basically. So it was shot in between season 1 and 2. And, you know, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but it maybe wasn't as successful as they had hoped. It was written by this guy, Lorenzo Semple Jr., who wrote a lot of the show, but he was tasked with writing the film. And the funniest thing about him is that outside of this, he's maybe best known for writing the political thrillers 3 Days of the Condor and The Parallax View, which I don't know if you've seen those movies, Nate. They couldn't be more different than this.
That is weird, especially because like this movie is so committed to the bit of like the ins and outs of this plot don't matter, and how they get from point A to point B or solve the riddles doesn't matter. And those movies are so the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of like, there's an intricate conspiracy and all the details matter, and you have to follow the plot.
And you want to know the craziest thing? He says this is the favorite thing that he ever wrote. Is this movie?
I get that, actually, because this... He's probably put a lot of pressure on himself for those other movies, and this is a fun way. And I do think that we've said camp a bunch of times, but I do think like there is a style of humor here that's a bit more locked in than just camp. Like it does feel like very specific, and I can see someone who writes those two movies getting into that specificity of humor for this. I know a lot of that is performance, but I do think some of the jokes are written in a way where you're like, I can see how someone who could come up with something as intricate and intense as that would have fun doing this.
Yeah, for sure.
Totally.
The irony being, however, that despite him saying that it's his favorite thing that he's written of those three things, listening to him on the commentary, he is not complimentary about the movie at all. He just kind of is like shitting on it throughout, because I guess it was like a really sort of slapped together process. He
they
says
didn't
like
have Lee Merriweather until like they already started filming.
Well, yeah, and she's not even, because Catwoman at the time was being played by Julie Newmar, and she was unavailable because she was doing another movie. So they brought Lee Merriweather in.
Came out.
Yeah, a movie that never comes out. So they bring in Lee Merriweather, and she only does the movie, which I also forgot. I thought she also ended up in the show, but she does not. Eartha Kitt later comes in as Catwoman. So there's three different Catwoman, but she only is in the movie. They never address this. But yeah, it was sort of very slapdash. It was directed by Leslie H. Martinson, who directed a bunch of the episodes of the show. And Semple describes his direction as very straightforward. He just sort of like saw what was on the page and put it on the screen.
Yeah.
But he says in the commentary, and I'm paraphrasing what he says, but he's like, I was never really a comic book fan. I read the first half dozen comics I read. The style was so self-evidently moronic that they didn't need any explanation. I didn't worry about how Batman began. I'm sure that movie is excellent, but this was done on a level of simplicity. I was extremely unpopular with serious comic book people. So he really...
Well, you know, that's where Christopher Nolan got the title, Batman
Exactly. Yeah. So...
I mean, Christopher Nolan got a lot from this movie.
Clearly.
Well, I mean, maybe more than
we... Trying to get rid of a bomb at the end of the movie.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is probably a great segue because you sort of alluded to it already, Daniel, and I think it's really important to contextualize the rest of this conversation, which is the campiness of the movie and the show, and what exactly does that mean? So, camp is one of those terms that, like, I've used, and I kind of understand when it's used in context, but I don't actually think I understand, like I know what it actually means. So this is where I'm going to turn to Nate, the intellectual of the group. Wow. Can you explain camp for us?
So I'm not going to like pretend to be an expert, but I remember reading in university an essay about it by Susan Sontag. And it was in like a class on beauty, I think. I went to art school, so we had classes on beauty. But it's actually a really good essay. It's really, really interesting. It's just like so well written. It's called Notes on Camp. And it comes out in 1964. So like, you know, right before this series starts.
Yeah.
And in the essay, she's basically saying like, this is this idea that's kind of like floating around. You know, she's, I believe, in New York, like in the Village.
Right.
She's mostly encountering it like in the gay scene in New York, right?
Right.
In some ways, I would say it's kind of like a sister concept to drag. It's all about like the exaggerated and the artificial and like things pretending to be things that they're not and that kind of thing. It's kind of hard to define, but actually the way that I first learned about camp was The Simpsons, of course, because there's the episode with John Waters called Homer. Yeah, Homer's Phobia, right? Great episode. Don't think it's actually got that many movie references, so we may never talk about it otherwise on this show.
Unless John Waters decides to be a guest, which, you know.
Wow, that would be great.
That's true.
I want to put that in the world for you.
Yeah, I would love that. There are very few references to his movies in that episode. For some reason, I can't imagine why.
I can't imagine why, yeah.
But so basically, there's a really like good capsule definition of camp in that episode where Homer says,
"How can you love a box or a toy or graphics? You're a grown man."
It's camp. The tragically ludicrous? The ludicrously tragic?
And Homer goes,
"Oh, yeah, like when a clown dies."
Well, sort of. But I mean more like inflatable furniture or Last Supper TV trays or even this bowling shirt. Can you believe somebody gave this to Goodwill?
And it's Homer's bowling shirt.
Right.
That's pretty good. Tragically ludicrous, ludicrously tragic. Things that are so earnest and trying to be serious, but actually are ridiculous, right?
Right.
One of the things that struck me in the essay, like rereading it for this, was that she says that movie criticism is probably the greatest popularizer of camp.
Okay.
And because like even in 1964, she's like, yeah, all these movie critics are writing lists of like the best, worst movies I've ever seen.
Right.
Okay.
And I'm like, holy shit, that is so mainstream now.
Yep.
Like, how did this get made, right? That's the whole point of that podcast, to the point where I don't even think people really say camp anymore that much because it's just so part of how we think about pop culture. So bad it's good. It's everywhere.
I think what's interesting, and Daniel, you sort of alluded to this earlier, is that like you had your mom contextualize Batman for you as like, no, this is supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
And for
to
me,
I thought it was serious.
Yeah, and for me, as
I think a lot of kids do.
when I'm watching it as a 6 or 7 year old and discovering Adam West and being like, I'm watching this because it's got my name in it. I'm just enjoying it on its merits of this is an entertaining show for a 7-year-old. And then as I rewatched reruns as a teenager, I'm like, this show is bad and it's like kind of cheaply made and like what like Robin is saying all this weird like and like the Joker, I can see his mustache. Like this is horrible. Like what did I see in this? And then it wasn't until I was like in university or later when I was like, oh, that was all intentional. This show is like intentionally bad. Like it's leaning into this. And
I mean,
one
not
of
the mustache, but yeah.
Well, maybe not the mustache. Yeah, that was a contractual thing.
Yeah, that was just I'm not shaving this.
But on the commentary, Semple sort of describes that a lot of the writers had a difficulty writing this show because he says like this is high camp. It's sort of a deadpan exaggeration, and we had trouble finding writers that could do it properly. They were either too silly or didn't do enough of it. So it's like really a very, very fine balance of like getting that. As you said, Nate, sort of like the exaggerated but seriousness correct. In a weird way, the beauty of Batman, the TV show, and the movie, much like The Simpsons, is like you can kind of enjoy it on these like multiple levels. And as you get older and you start to understand what they're trying to do, it's like, well, at the very base level, you can just enjoy it as like a superhero half-hour serialized romp. And then you can sort of peel back the layers and be like, the Batusi is absolutely absurd. And like, that's the point. And then it becomes an actual dance craze, which is just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, totally. One thing I was thinking about a lot watching this is that like, I feel like a lot of the movies that we've covered on the show are campy. And we just never talked about them in those terms. But like, I actually think this might be one of the divisions in our taste a little bit, Adam.
Yeah, interesting.
Is that like, if you go back and look at all the movies that like I recommended and you didn't, I think a lot of them are probably like, I'm like, no, these are like fun because they're camp. Right. Like I think about Paint Your Wagon. I recommended because it is trying. It's working really hard to be good by its own terms. And it's just not, but like it's so over the top and so extravagant. They built an entire town and like all that kind of stuff.
They sure did.
But it is so ridiculous. It's Clint Eastwood in a cowboy western, or The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas has a bit of that, or Planet of the Apes has a bit of that, I think.
So maybe this speaks to just my misunderstanding here, because I guess what I would say is the difference between Planet of the Apes and Paint Your Wagon is that like those movies feel sincere, like whereas Best Little Whorehouse is very tongue in cheek. And I guess to me, camp, my brain definition, which again may be completely misguided, but like I've sort of always thought of camp as being like it's this ridiculousness and over the top, but it's self-aware and tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, they're in on the joke.
Like I think of like Burlesque. Remember when we saw Burlesque in theaters,
Right.
which I fucking love that movie. But like it knows it's ridiculous. It has to know it's ridiculous. Like it talks about air rights.
This is kind of the heart of the debate, is that so Susan Sontag would have you believe that true camp is naive. It doesn't know that it's ridiculous. So like The Room, the movie The Room,
Yep.
that is camp. That's like the perfect definition of camp, where it's like someone is putting their life into this thing and it's just
not working.
Bad, but it's kind of endearingly bad, and it's funny at the same time. Like that, to her, that's like true camp. And like this is something that you could argue about with Batman, is like clearly it's in on the joke.
Yeah.
But does that mean that it's kind of like the end of camp?
Interesting. Well, I guess that's the John Waters thing, because if you use The Room, that is tragically ludicrous and ludicrously tragic. Right?
Exactly.
because he wanted it to be this piece of art that people legitimately thought was like layered and well done. He didn't want it to be a joke. But I still feel like it has to be that camp is like a paint you can use. Like I feel like it's intentional, but I obviously haven't read this essay and it might sway me, and I also haven't attempted to try and define it other than a feeling I get where it's like, to me, yeah, Batman 66 is camp because it's like they're aware of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And more so like you can then be in on the joke with them, as opposed to just laughing at it and not understanding that they want that reaction out of you.
Totally. And like John Waters is a good example too of like Hairspray is more like Batman than it is like The Room.
Yeah.
Right. In the sense that like it's kind of capturing a camp sensibility of like the 60s and like youth culture and weird wholesomeness that's like overbearing and kind of gross.
Yeah.
And breaking out of that. But it's totally in on all of it. It's not naive camp. So it's like, I think it's fuzzier than Susan Sontag makes it out to be, but it's just interesting to think about of like, Saturday Night Fever is kind of like the end of disco, because it's like, it was this like queer thing and this thing that was like popular in communities of color. And then it's just like, John Travolta
so
and the Bee
mainstream.
Gees.
Yeah.
So in some ways is Batman also kind of marking the end of that, where it's like, it was this subculture thing and now it's like fully mainstream.
Interesting.
Anyway.
Well, and I mean, it kind of ties back to our earlier conversations in other episodes about like the difference between pastiche and parody, and how like there's this sort of like knowingness and are you trying to say something versus just like a loving homage and all that. So yeah, I feel like we'll have to revisit camp with other titles that we cover on the show, which I'm sure it's going to come up again, because based on the Simpsons writers and their sensibilities, I feel like it has to. So okay, well, moving on from camp, let's talk about some of the like things we loved and things we didn't love so much about this movie. Daniel, what's something that comes to mind for you that you really want to like chat about that you loved from this movie?
I legitimately like the humor. I thought it was very funny that Catwoman legitimately could not help but be Catwoman, like even when she's kid, because she's still going like perfect, and then like they're looking through the periscope and she's like, "Wah," and like the henchman looks over her and they're like, "What? Are you okay?" like a moment like that to me doesn't feel like camp. That feels like a very specific kind of comedy, and I was like, this is right up my alley, of that henchman being like, "What is wrong with you?" when she's just like, "Wah," like looking through the periscope. I am a Frank Gorshin fan. Like I as the Riddler, I don't know anything else that he's done. I know he's an actor outside of that.
That's a great segue to talk about the cast, because that's really where I wanted to start, was with them, because I think that's for me the most memorable thing, and the thing I appreciated even more on this rewatch that I never would have like had context for as a child. The craziest thing to me about Batman, the TV series and the movie, is like I cannot imagine being an adult watching this show in 1966 because of the like caliber of actors playing these absolutely ridiculous villains. And I assumed that this was just like a weird fluke, but allegedly after the premiere, the production team was swarmed with calls from famous actors being like, I want to be on this show. Like, this is something magical. I want to be one of these characters. So, like, Mr. Freeze, for example, was played by 3 different screen legends. George Sanders, Otto Preminger, and Eli Wallach all played Mr. Freeze.
So wild.
Vincent Price. Now, granted, Vincent Price is maybe like a B-list like very much a B movie star.
Like,
but
I knew who he was.
Everybody knows who Vincent Price is. He plays arguably the dumbest villain of all time, Egghead.
The source of Vincent Price's egg magic on The Simpsons.
And I mean, I love Vincent Price. And if you haven't gone back and watched old Vincent Price Tonight Show like guest interviews, do yourself a favor and do so. In fact, one of my all-time favorites is one where he cooks salmon in the dishwasher, because apparently he was like, I did not know, he was like he released multiple cookbooks because he was like a French, like trained French chef. Like he was allegedly an incredible chef.
The more you know.
Yeah. Like legendary comedian Milton Berle plays a character called Louis the Lilac. So anyway,
that classic Batman character.
Yeah, so like the cast of characters on this show are just, and then subsequently in this movie, are amazing. So I think we should start with the king of them all, Mr. Adam West. And how do we feel about Mr. West's Batman portrayal?
Just for this movie, I have to say, there's the moment where he's in the Batcave and he realizes who Penguin is, and he's just trying to get him out so that they can follow him. His delivery of like every line of
Come on down, Commodore. Another sniff of bat gas, and we'll all return to the city.
I thought that was really good. He's not my favorite in the movie, but I appreciated his commitment to this.
Yeah, I just couldn't get over how good he looked. Like, there's that scene early on where he's wearing like a neckerchief, and I'm like, damn, Adam West is hot.
Yeah, it's true. All the scenes where he's Bruce Wayne, I'm like, wow. I don't remember him being Bruce Wayne that much on the show, except for like being on the phone.
Yeah,
he asked to be Bruce Wayne in this a lot more. That was like a condition of doing the movie. Was I need more Bruce Wayne?
Interesting. I didn't know
because there's that fight scene where I'm like, this could have been Batman.
Yeah.
But
yeah, totally.
I was like, he must have asked, and then I looked it up. And yes, he asked for more screen time just as Bruce Wayne.
Interesting. Well, I mean, it makes sense. It's like if you're gonna have a higher profile thing, I'm sure for Adam West, he's like, well, I want to get like other acting work. Like, this is all fine and good, but like I want people to know who Adam West is, right?
Yeah. Well, and I hate to break it to you, that didn't turn out. So it's funny because I think of him, I kind of think of him as having like a Leslie Nielsen-esque career, because he starts out as like a character actor in like Westerns and detective shows and was like a serious actor. Then he gets Batman, and basically like it was his biggest achievement, but also really hinders the rest of his career. In fact, him, Burt Ward, and then I can't remember her name, Yvonne something. The woman who played Batgirl, like they all suffered from this problem of just like they couldn't get work because everybody just associated them with Batman. What's interesting is he sort of is one of the first stars that I can think of that kind of realizes this and decides to lean into it, which is now like because of Comic-Cons and all these things, like it's very common. But like he was like, okay, well, I'm gonna just lean into this fact that everybody associates me with Batman. And like, do you remember Goosebumps, the TV show Goosebumps?
I do.
He played Attack of the Mutant character.
Yeah, he played a character on that was basically like a washed up superhero. He does the same thing in Batman the Animated Series. He plays in Beware the Grey Ghost. He plays a washed up actor best known for playing a superhero. And then this is a little hard to substantiate because all the sources I could find were from like Argentinian fan websites of all places. But there were rumors that there was talk of him being cast as Thomas Wayne, Bruce's father in the Tim Burton Batman.
Sure.
But he basically
Possible, I
said
guess.
he basically said no. He's like, I couldn't take that role because I was Batman. People already know me as Batman, and I wouldn't feel comfortable destroying that image, but I would gladly take the role of Batman. So he allegedly was like gunning to be Batman again in the 80s.
But like, thanks to these CW shows, it's like, no, you're gonna play the parent now. Like, like if you did play the superhero, you're gonna play their parent or some older state.
So true.
So then he ends up like ending off his career. I think like one of his other best known roles is on Family Guy. He's like the mayor of Quahog or whatever.
But as himself, as
himself, yes.
Right?
Well, like, this sort of like Larry David and Curb kind of like, he's Adam West, but he's not Adam West. Yeah. But he did make a movie called The Happy Hooker Goes to Hollywood, which I've always wanted to see.
Sounds great.
Yeah. But
is he the Happy Hooker?
No. It's
too bad.
It's the third in a trilogy, and I think he's just like a character in the film. But
I see.
But I don't know. There's something about his Batman that I find charming. He wouldn't be my like number one Batman, but I do like his performance.
For sure. I mean, like, this is kind of a bridge to Burt Ward, I guess, but I think the dynamic between Batman and Robin, and this is really interesting because they're kind of flawed, weirdly, like considering it's a comedy and all, but like Batman is so square in this, right? To use the lingo of the time, but he's just so square and like so by the books. He's not the Batman of like old comics or new movies in that like he works with the cops, right? And he like,
I really
and
don't
he's,
like that.
I know he's very like establishment, law and order, status quo.
Yeah,
they even
like,
say he's not a vigilante. Like they really push back on it.
Right. But the thing that I love about this movie, and I don't remember this dynamic from the show, but maybe it was always like this, is Robin is kind of a fascist.
Yeah, I feel like that is the show. Like,
and I think it's probably
you're a little too eager to do this stuff.
It's a little product of its time.
I think it's intentional. I don't think it's a product of its time. I think it's meant to be over the top and kind of like out of step with the time.
Okay.
Of like kind of a throwback to like the 50s or the 40s.
Right.
But it's coming out in the mid 60s, right? In this movie, there are scenes Robin is super uncomfortable with any kind of sex, right? And very uncomfortable with Batman like being with a woman.
Annoying. Yeah. I was like, you're missing it. You're missing it.
Yep. And then but the craziest thing is there's a scene where he gets mad at Batman for saving a bar full of people.
Yes.
And suggests that they should have all just died.
Yes.
Because they're drinking.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they're drinking.
You risked your life to save that riffraff in the bar?
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Which I was like, oh, true colors. I see.
Batman does sort of step in and say, no, Robin, like just because they're down on their luck or whatever, they deserve to be saved just like anyone else. Like they're still citizens of this great
but that's
city.
kind of the vibe though, is it's like Robin is far right and then Batman is like center right.
Yeah.
And he's always reining him in and being like, no, the status quo is good.
Yes.
And Robin's like, but maybe it should be more fascist. Maybe it should be like a theocracy of some kind.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
anyway.
I don't have much to contribute in terms of Robin, you know, and we're going to talk about this in the Batman 89 episode, but like everybody's afraid of Robin. There's a reason he's not in the first two movies. And I think it's very much the 60s and the like homoerotic subtones and all that stuff. But I don't hate Robin like everybody else does. And maybe it's also because like I really like his portrayal in the animated series. But the one piece of trivia I will share with you all is that, and this is actually portrayed in the very bizarre biopic / sequel, which is called Back to the Batcave, The Misadventures of Adam and Bert, which was a made-for-TV movie that is essentially about the making of the TV show, but then it has these wraparound segments featuring Adam West and Burt Ward, and also a bunch of the actors who played the villains, and the villains are trying to capture it. It is very meta and very surreal and very weird. But there's a whole section where they talk about how Robin's costume was far too revealing of his gentleman's area, and that he was required to wear special like underwear to conceal it.
That is noticeable in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
He is completely flat, like a 10
especially
ball.
when he does like the trapeze thing, like to hand down the bat repellent or the shark repellent. I'm like, oh, they did a good job of really smoothing that out.
Yeah. So that's he's wearing very specially fitted bat underwear or Robin underwear, I guess. So my question is, Daniel, and you kind of alluded to this, but what are your thoughts on our 4 villains that we get, and do you have a favorite?
I mean, if it was the show, it would be Cesar Romero's Joker, but I feel like he's wasted in this movie. So
yeah, a little bit.
I mean, literally any of the other 3 are great. It's like, I don't have a problem with any of them. I always feel a way about the Frank Gorshin Riddler, and I like it because I feel people gave Jim Carrey such a hard time when he did Riddler, and I'm like, what do you want him to do? Like, there's one version of the Riddler that everyone knows, and he's basically doing that. I don't understand what the disconnect was. People were so angry that he was so silly, and I'm like, he's doing Frank Gorshin. He's Jim Carrey 1, and 2, he's doing Frank Gorshin.
Yeah. What do you expect?
Totally. I love that rendition of the Riddler. I don't think he's what's wrong with that movie.
No, not at all. There's a lot of things wrong with that movie, and it's not Jim Carrey. Yeah, Gorshin is such a fascinating figure, too, because he's a comedian and impressionist. He gets Batman, and that's basically like the biggest thing that he does, but he just sort of like dines out on it and is totally fine with it.
Good.
So, and then did you know that he's replaced in season 2 by John Astin, who plays Gomez Addams on the Addams Family?
Sean Astin's dad.
Yes, exactly.
There you go.
And then
that's wild. I don't think I did know that.
Yeah, and then he comes back for season 3.
The John Astin Riddler.
I think he also has a mustache, if I'm not mistaken, when he plays the Riddler. But yeah, I really like him. But speaking of mustaches, like, I bought the movie on iTunes, so I'm watching it in HD, and boy, is Cesar Romero's mustache very, very noticeable.
Yeah, it just adds to the camp in the context of this movie.
No, exactly. It's
sure,
like,
why not?
and my favorite thing about Cesar Romero, of course, within a Simpsons context, is it reminds me of one of my favorite jokes in the show, which is when Homer is visited by the ghost of Cesar Chavez, and he goes,
"Why do you look like Cesar Romero?"
Because you don't know what Cesar Chavez looks like.
Yeah. That is a good one. Yeah, no, but Daniel, I think you're spot on. I think that, unfortunately, the Joker is kind of wasted in this one.
Yeah, because he's definitely just taking orders. They kind of yada yada over. He's got some springboard in the floor, and that'll kill Batman. But everyone else has like a legitimate plan. Like, Catwoman's doing her Kit Kat thing. The Penguin's like, I'll get the
I'll use my
thing
along with all of my umbrellas.
Yeah, like I'm pretty much running the show, and then Riddler, he comes up with something I don't remember. I mean, he's doing the riddles.
He's doing the convoluted riddles.
He's really trying to bring.
That's right.
Like,
he's
bring
got
them
the
along.
rockets with the skywriting.
Yes, the skywriting riddle
and
rockets.
then Joker's just kind of like, yeah, I guess I'll shoot Torpedo 1, and I'll shoot. And I'm just like, what a waste of Joker.
Yeah, it is funny because obviously, like, since then, the Joker has become like the ultimate Batman nemesis supervillain. But in this movie, you're right. Like, he's kind of just there. He gets a couple of like funny moments, and like obviously, like, he's the one who goes and visits Admiral Schmidt-Lab and like gives him his tea and all that stuff. But like, as you say, the Penguin is the one who goes undercover as the fake Admiral Schmidt-Lab, and Catwoman goes undercover as Miss Kitka, and like the Joker's just sort of there to push buttons. And
it kind of speaks to my bigger problem with this movie, I think, is just that I don't know that the TV show really scales up very well to a feature-length film, and I don't feel like they knew what to do to make it bigger, so they're just like, we'll have 4 villains, and
but like
that'll
all have,
make it bigger.
And I feel like they all have 2 plans, because I'm like, they couldn't kill Bat. We're on to the UN thing. Like, what is happening in this movie? Like, they're just constantly like, and okay, now we're doing this thing, and now we're doing this thing, and I'm like, I understand how if you were writing 4 episodes, it would play out like this, but you should be making a movie.
Well,
just 4 episodes.
Totally.
So this is a perfect segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is this convoluted plot. But apparently, they wrote the movie in 10 days with an additional 3 days of rewrites. So it was like very much slapped together.
Really put a lot of work into it.
But what made it different was that this was not uncommon for like popular TV shows to have theatrical releases. But what they would do is they would essentially take like 2 or 3 episodes, stitch them together, throw them in theaters. This film was actually written as a theatrical, like, let's start from scratch. We have 2 hours to play with here. Like, what do we want to do with it? So it's interesting that they take this approach, which it is overstuffed. Like having 4 villains was unnecessary. And I guess like they're like, well, these are our 4 most popular characters on the show. Like, let's put them all together and see what we get. But again, it's like, to your point, Daniel, it's like at the end of the day, the ultimate plan is we're going to dehydrate the UN. Like, it's not even like tied to any of their like particular, like it's not a funny thing, it's not a riddly thing, there's not a catty, like it's just, it makes no sense.
Well, again, it's like they were like, it has to be bigger than Gotham City, so it has to be a world thing.
I think that was my other thing, is that I should have watched more episodes before. Like, I'm pretty sure I've seen all of the series, but it's not fresh in my head, and I wanted to watch episodes because I'm like, this just doesn't feel like it's the movie. I could have just watched this on TV, and I understand that maybe there's some shots that look more majestic, and they've got a bat copter and a bat bike. But like, it doesn't feel like they made a movie.
Well, and what's
the stakes don't feel higher. Really,
and the thing,
than the show.
Again, part of, to your point, Nate, like part of what makes the show work is that serialized, like, how are Batman and Robin going to get out of this? They always do, but it's like that's part of the fun, is to see how they're going to escape, which they don't do really. Apart from the part where they get like magnetically stuck to the buoy, like it doesn't really happen ever again.
But it was a funny payoff where it's like, it was really nice of that porpoise to let us go.
that is a good payoff.
Or to take the hit for us. Like, that was really nice of it.
And to your point, Daniel, like I haven't watched the show in a very long time, but my memory was that like the sticky situations they always find themselves in are always very much tied to the villain. So if it's Mr. Freeze, it's something ice related. When it was like King Tut, they might be attacked by mummies. Like, whereas in this, like, none of the situations they find themselves in are related to the villains in any way. It's just like, well, we've got a bunch of villains, and like, so it's just, it's this weird thing of like, it doesn't really feel like the show. It's like trying to just be bigger and better, but it's bigger, but it's not necessarily better. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's how I felt.
That's how I felt too. And I appreciated the sort of joke around, you know, they'd get a riddle and then they'd have that Adam West like logic moment where they like connect all these sort of like almost stream of consciousness things.
Yeah.
And then they're like, clearly it's this. And then they go do that thing.
What weighs 6 ounces, sits in a tree, and is very dangerous?
A sparrow with a machine gun.
Yes, of course.
But they do it like at least twice, maybe 3 times in this movie. Because of that, it kind of feels like the plot just doesn't make any sense. And again, the joke's funny, but it's also kind of telling the audience, like, why do you care about this bullshit?
Yeah.
You know, in a way that is not kind to the source material. I don't know. There's like there's such like a fine balance of like lovingly poking fun at these characters and stuff versus being like, why do you care about this baby shit? Like, just, you know, grow up.
I think I know it's a comedy, but I think a big issue I had was, and I have it with other Batman movies as well, is that they made him dumb for some stuff. Like, I get the whole he fell for Kitka thing. That makes sense to me. They've done
but
that.
It doesn't make sense that he doesn't figure out that she's Catwoman.
He should have figured out because she's constantly purring and stuff. But
right.
But it's more the penguin thing that I was like, how are you not cluing into what's happening? Like, he gets it after the fact, but there's a moment where it's like very clearly the penguin. He's like, we don't have his fingerprints. Like, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, you idiot. And like, I think it's a big reason why I don't like Batman versus Superman either, because I'm like, you've just put Batman in a situation where we as the audience just know he's wrong. It's not something he has to like overcome or learn. He's just wrong. Like, he's like, I have to kill Superman. It's like, well, no, you don't. Everyone knows Superman's a good guy. Like, I'm gonna watch 3 hours of you be an idiot. Like, but like, then you do the Batman, which has the same roster of bad guys.
Yeah.
But like the El Rata thing where he doesn't know Spanish, and I'm like, okay, well, that at least plays into he is so far removed from being a human, and he needs to bring his way back to that. Yeah. So I don't love it, but I can excuse it. But this, I'm just like, no, you should know what you're doing. These aren't new villains. Like, you've come up against these villains a bunch of times. You should know who they are.
Totally.
Well,
world's greatest detective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's my biggest qualm here, is that like, I just didn't find this movie to be as fun or as campy as I remembered the show being. Like, I remember the show having like Batman and Robin trapped in a giant cake made of quicksand. And I remember there being weird dance sequences. And like, there are funny little throwaway moments like him when he goes on the date with Miss Kitka and he's drinking milk out of a brandy snifter. Like there are these like little subtle things, but for the most part, it's just like it feels like the movie's almost taking itself too seriously and too earnestly. And it's like you've kind of stripped away all of the things that made the show fun in this effort to make a big budget movie. Until you get to the bomb sequence. Like I think the bomb sequence is where
that
like
made me laugh. Like
but
it was really like they just kept
weirdly
going, and I was like, this is funny.
I the whole time I'm watching this, I'm like, when are we get, because going into this, having not watched it in like 15, 20 years, the bomb sequence is the thing I remembered the most.
Totally.
And I didn't realize that it's in like the last 10 minutes of the movie. Like I was like kept waiting for it because in my mind I was like, it's one of the like opening set pieces because it sets the tone for the rest of the thing. But it doesn't. Like it comes so late. And by that point, I'm just sort of like, it almost feels like you're doing a complete 180 from the tone that the rest of the movie has had. Because like you said, like you've had this like very serious, like romantic sequence where like he's in love with Miss Kitka. And it's just like, so it's just tonally the thing is kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of their budget went into vehicles,
Yes.
which means that then they just had to have all these vehicle sequences, but they're all kind of similar of just
Well,
like
a lot. It's a lot of them pulling into the same parking spot with the Batmobile. And I'm just like,
Yep.
just do that once. I don't need to see this ever again.
Totally. And then just like, you know, we need to have the Batcopter and we need to have the Batboat and then there's just a lot of footage of that. Whereas like, yeah, I would have rather seen like, I don't know, a giant hourglass or, you know, something like that. Weirdly, I actually think like Batman Forever, Batman and Robin kind of do this better a little bit. I mean, I know that's probably, you know, some people don't like those movies, but in terms of like where they put their budget in terms of supporting the tone of those movies, I think they get the balance a little bit better.
Yeah,
I do think it's like a pacing thing too, because like that first scene where they're going to the yacht, it's so slow that I forgot that the yacht, I forgot the yacht disappeared. I was like, oh, they must be somewhere else.
Yep.
Like I spaced out enough that I was like, when they said, oh yeah, the yacht disappeared, I'm like, I guess it did. I didn't see it, but like. I'm literally watching this guy climb down the ladder.
Even the whole Batcopter thing, it's like, it goes on and on and on. And then it's like, they're waving to people. And it's like, okay, we get it. You have a helicopter. Like, maybe that's impressive in 1966, but like.
Adam, it's like what you've said many times about underwater sequences where they're just like, look, we're underwater.
Yeah.
It's like, we're moving so slowly. Look at the fish. It's kind of got that vibe of just like, we have a helicopter. We're going to go over the city and wave at people and look at those women in bikinis and, and all that kind of stuff instead of like being part of the story.
Yeah. I mean, I do want to talk a little bit about the iconography from the show that is sort of ripples into the TV series. Specifically, the thing that I most want to talk about is I followed I think it was a Tumblr account or maybe it was a Twitter account. I can't remember, but it was called like Bat Labels. And it was a guy that documented all of the stuff on the show that was labeled. And it is one of my favorite, like, subtle non-joke jokes because I couldn't get over how much shit was labeled in this show. Not just the Batman stuff, but even like in the supervillains layer, they have like, this is Joker's shelves and this is like Riddler's shelves. But I wanted to talk about the oceanic repellent bat sprays because I wrote them down. These are what Batman has in the Batcopter because you never know when you're going to need barracuda repellent, whale repellent, manta ray repellent, and then, of course, shark repellent. So those are the four that he keeps handy. But yeah, speaking to sort of the problem that I feel with this is that, like, it's kind of missing some of those elements of the show that I love. Like, you don't get the opening theme song. Like, the opening credits from this are so weird.
I was so disappointed. I was like, seriously? We're not doing the actual theme? Because it's just a different theme.
It's a completely different thing and a completely different style.
I love opening credits, but they're not the right ones for this movie. No. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's the one thing from the TV show that you should take like exactly almost as is. Just do a bigger version of exactly the opening from the TV show.
The iconic theme. Exactly.
And
but
even
the credits
by this point in time, they would have known that everyone knows the theme.
Yes.
You know, it was a huge hit. So like,
and I don't know if the credits are meant to be. I looked. I couldn't find any information on who designed them, who was responsible for them. I have a feeling they're riffing on the James Bond titles of the era because at this point you haven't gotten into the Morris Binder. Now we're getting really nerdy. You haven't gotten into the Morris Binder era of James Bond credits. You've had Dr. No, which is like all the circles and stuff, which is like the very James Bondy. But then From Russia with Love and Goldfinger are designed by this guy Robert Brownjohn, where it's like they're projecting scenes from the movie onto just like the women's bodies. Yeah. And like it's just like color washes, and that's what this is. Right. It's just like weird color washes over the cast. So I don't know if that's what they're riffing on, but like immediately I'm like, well, again, you're not setting the tone very well because like, am I going to get myself into like a James Bond situation, or am I going to have a fun Batman romp? I don't know.
I agree. I mean, I think they look really cool. I'm like really into them. They have a kind of like pop art noir thing going on of like people running down dark alleys, but
even that, like, what is that supposed to be? Like, why is there a random guy running through an alley throughout all of this?
When you said 3 Days of the Condor and Parallax, I was like, I mean, it feels like it's from that, but
totally.
But I don't know, like it just didn't sit well with me. But to your point, Nate, I remember them. I remember the look of it. Like it stuck out. It's not like it washed over me. And then it's like, oh yeah, okay.
And then the other thing that drives me crazy is that we don't get the iconic Wham, Pow, Ka-chunk, Bort punch titles until basically the last battle of the movie, which I don't know if that was like...
thought they were just saving it. Like,
but like...
But I was like, you don't have to. You could just do that throughout.
It's weird.
And they're not full screen, right?
But I think that maybe that's the thing, because like those ones in the TV show are probably really cheap because they reuse them, right? Every time they filled the whole screen. So it's just like, now cut to one of those and now cut back. Whereas in the movie, they're actually putting them in the right place, like over top of someone's fist or whatever. And like maybe they were like, oh, let's do that. We have a bigger budget, but then they only do it in one scene because it's like more work.
It's like expensive. A technical feat that doesn't really what people want from it.
So again, in the commentary, one of the things that Lorenzo Semple Jr. talks about is he says like, doing successful fights takes time and money. And on the show, they don't have either of those things. So the fight scenes are done really, really quickly, and they don't look very good. So that's why they use those like full screen titles is just sort of like cover up just how bad the fights are. But then he basically shits on the movie and says like, the fights aren't particularly well. Like he specifically calls out the fight sequence in the bar, and he's like, "This is so badly choreographed. It looks terrible." But they didn't cover any of this stuff. Like, again, this commentary is worth listening to just because, like, for a guy who says he loves this work, he is just shitting on it for the entire time.
Well, I think he's saying he likes what he wrote, and he might not like what they turned it into.
I think you might be right, Daniel. He's like proud of his script, but the end result doesn't live up to his expectations.
Oh man, I mean, yeah, the fight scenes are really something. There is one move that is like now burned into my brain of. I think it's like they're fighting on the submarine, right? On the top of the submarine. And like Batman gets kind of like thrown back, and then he pulls his fists, both of his fists back at once. And then like, I think Robin like launches them forward and he punches two people in the face.
I instantly knew what you were going to say because that is a great moment.
It's pretty memorable.
Yeah. But again, like that's part of the fun of the TV show. And it's funny. I also do remember as a kid, when we went to go see Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat in Toronto, the friends we went to their grandparents' house and we were watching Batman. And the kid I was watching it with, there was like a fight scene and he got really into it and he punched me in the face. And it was the first and only time I've ever been punched. But it just goes to show that, violent television, it will cause children to punch other children in the face.
Oh yeah,
that's true.
I was trying to do Power Ranger moves on everybody in the play.
Yeah, see, I wasn't allowed to watch Power Rangers because of that.
I wasn't either, but didn't stop me from finding it and then being like, oh, here we go.
Yep. I can remember imitating Batman the Animated Series and with my next door neighbor, and she jumped off of a dresser and like hit her head or something horrible. And no stitches. Yeah, no stitches or anything like that. But in retrospect, that might be why I wasn't allowed to watch.
Right, because your neighbor cracked her head open.
Yeah, not quite, but it was bad enough.
I mean, Stitches that's pretty bad. Okay, fair enough. Well, and then I mean, at least we do get a couple of great Dutch angle moments in the show, which
more than a couple.
Well, yeah, fair
it's
enough.
like any scene with any of the villains, the whole thing is in Dutch angles, which I love.
I have this in quotes, and I think it must be because it came from the commentary, but scenes shot in the arch criminals' headquarters layers were filmed in a Dutch angle. This was intentional and was meant to show that the four villains were crooked. So, talk about literal.
Show the imbalance because Joker clearly has no power with these guys.
Yeah. But it is one of the iconic things of the show that The Simpsons obviously parody. And I mean, my favorite time they do it is when they run into Adam West at the Comic-Con, and as he's talking, the camera slowly starts to turn before he gives Pure West, which is just I can love Adam West. The day he died, celebrity deaths don't normally get me, but for whatever reason, that and Sean Connery, they both were like, it feels like an iconic part of my childhood has just died. So I was really bummed when Adam West passed away. Well, that brings us to the part of the show that I love every time, which is the parts that seems like Simpson jokes but aren't. Nate, Daniel, do either one of you want to go first, or shall I?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in here. You know, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but I do think there's a lot of shared comedy DNA between Batman, more so the TV series than the movie, and The Simpsons, right? Even just you were talking about the signs.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's The Simpsons does this too, just labeling any old thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes funny, but sometimes just to clarify quickly what you're looking at.
Yeah.
It's this button does this thing. Probably the most Simpsons-y one of that was when they forget what it is. Maybe they crashed their helicopter or something into the foam rubber wholesalers convention.
I wrote that one down too.
And there's a sign that says that, and then in the foreground there's another sign that says foam rubber in its crude form.
Yeah, what that feels like it's a Simpsons-y joke because of the signage, but B, it's the absurdity of why would this even exist outside of a plot device? So they're drawing attention to it. Yeah, I love that moment so much. Daniel, was there anything that felt super Simpsons-y to you?
I do feel like the bomb, but I think it's more I think of Homer falling down the cliff of you're doing it enough that it becomes funny. At first you're kind of you are laughing, and then you're kind of just all right, but then it comes back around to being funny again. So not exactly the same thing, but a similar idea of just keep it going and people will start laughing again.
Yeah, it kind of has that Sideshow Bob rake level of
quality
humor. And I love when the marching band comes back and sort of they almost start chasing Batman. They're not getting out of the way, and he's like, I have a bomb. Yeah, no, that's so great.
In that scene too, I feel just the shorthand comedy of being
Totally.
all of these people you don't want to blow up, nuns, a mom with a stroller, a couple kissing in a boat, the baby ducklings or whatever. They use that kind of shorthand too a lot, of just kind of very quickly communicating something, especially in these short little jokes
and this is one of those things where I do think we have to shout out Adam West. The reason that scene works is because of his performance and then his delivery of
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
and in lesser hands. Christian Bale couldn't pull that off. He's a great Batman, but he could not pull that scene off. That is pure West, as he says. The moment that I will call out, because you guys, those were the ones that I was also going to say, but there is the scene where Robin and Alfred are sitting in the Batmobile and they're kind of keeping tabs on Bruce on his date. And Alfred is wearing the domino mask behind his glasses, which is just a very funny image. But it more specifically reminds me of when Mr. Burns is driving his old timey car, and he pulls up to the gas station and asks Marge to fill it up, but he wears these old timey driving glasses, and so because Alfred's old, immediately that image came to mind.
For sure,
which is just very funny to me. So I love Mr. Burns stuff.
Also, Commodore Schmidlap.
Yes, that's a very
name that I kept thinking for sure this guy's fake, but oh no, like they're just committing to this real person.
Again, never pays off. There's no explanation
he doesn't think he's kidnapped, so he doesn't care what's going on because he's just like, oh, they're just taking care of me.
Well, and
he doesn't get rescued, right?
Nope.
No.
There's no payoff there. But I will say when they reveal how they've tricked him by having like one of the henchmen like pulling on he's got a flipper in a tub of water and he's just blowing into an air horn every once in a while. That's also a great little gag.
That made me laugh. That's like a legit Batman the TV series gag.
Yes, totally. I just wish there was more of that. So
yeah.
Well, I guess this will come as no shock to you guys, but this movie didn't do amazing. Like, it didn't do terribly, but it didn't do amazing. So the budget of it was around $1.3 million, which apparently was about 20 times the cost of a single episode. So, like, they put a lot of money into this.
Sure.
But its gross was only $3.9 million, which is equal to $36 million today. So, like, it's not horrible. Like, they tripled their budget. But, like, I think based on the success of the TV show, they were really expecting it to do a lot better.
But I think people already knew a season 2 was coming. So I've heard that there was a disconnect between people being like, what are they doing over there? I can just watch this at home.
Yeah. And I also very much get the impression that like the first season comes out and America is swept by bat fever. And then by the summer, it starts to like cool. So like people were kind of just like, and this kind of happens today too. It's like something becomes popular. It becomes so popular that it's just like you're inundated by it. And then eventually it kind of overstays its welcome. So it's this thing of like, maybe if this movie had come out first, it would have done better, but you kind of needed the show to set the template so that people would understand what they're getting into. So it was like they kind of couldn't win. The movie really shouldn't exist. Basically.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Is if this came out first, it doesn't capture the magic of the show.
No,
so like it wouldn't have launched the show very well, unfortunately.
I just to run down the top 10 of the year, just so you have a little context for like what else is out there. You've got Alfie, The Professionals, Grand Prix, a movie called The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, Lieutenant Robertson Caruso, USN, A Man for All Seasons, The Sand Pebbles, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is like a
Queen of the Hoppies.
Yeah, couldn't be more different. A movie called Hawaii, directed by George Roy Hill, starring Julie Andrews, Max von Sydow, and Richard Harris. A movie I have never heard of.
Never heard of that, but I know all those people. So it's
exactly, yeah, I know. It's like how have I never heard of this movie that is made by an incredible director with an incredible cast, but like, and then the number one film of the year, directed by John Huston, the legendary John Huston, was The Bible, because this was still in the era where like sword and sandals movies were like the biggest things ever. So in that context, I'm not surprised that Batman wasn't like ripping up the charts, because it could not be further from the rest of these very serious, like very sincere, austere movies. And unsurprisingly, it was not nominated for any Academy Awards.
Yes. I see in our notes under Academy Awards, Adam has just written, ha!
Yes, that was by Mrs. Krabappel. Yeah. To that point, I also couldn't really track down any reviews from the time period. But in the commentary, Semple sort of says like the movie was not very successful in theaters. And reading the reviews, like modern reviews, it sort of says like, it's fun, but it doesn't quite capture the magic of the TV show.
Yeah.
But for a period, and this is something also that's important to remember, you know, when I had it on VHS, I was at a time when, like, if I wanted to rewatch Batman, if it wasn't airing, that was my only option, because DVD didn't exist yet. You couldn't release the series. So, like, you couldn't catch the series whenever you wanted. So it was like, this was a good way to get a taste of the series until it was, like, readily available that you could just go back and rewatch the show. This was sort of your best option. But
I have a question for you both. So obviously we talked a little bit about the campiness. We talked a little bit about Batman 1989. When do you think public opinion like turned on the 1966 Adam West Batman? Because I feel like by the time the Tim Burton project kind of rolls around, everyone's like, well, clearly we want to get away from that. It's so campy. No one wants that anymore. But like this was such a popular thing at the time. So like I don't know the answer to this, but do you feel like it was like instant, like right after it stopped being popular, people were like, ugh, God, that Batman thing. Or did it take till the 80s?
And Daniel, you might know better than me, but I'm gonna guess it would be around the time Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns comes out, and like year one, and the sort of like 80s like gritty Batman thing starts, that was probably a reaction to the sort of like 66 TV series and the sort of like golden age silly comics, and like, oh well, this is a character that, you know, his parents were murdered and that's why he became a vigilante, so like we can take that and ground it, and then the popularity of that sort of skyrockets, and then everybody sort of who likes that is like, well, then there's that stupid TV show for kids where it's like they dance and like get caught in quicksand and it's super silly. So like I have a feeling that that's probably what happened, was just like
I would say it's like the Frank Miller of it all, because that was the issue people had with the announcement of Michael Keaton. It's like, you got a comedian, right? That's Mr. Mom. Like, I don't want that.
Exactly.
You're gonna do Adam West Batman again. And I guess at that point, Tim Burton had done Pee Wee Herman, so you couldn't really be like, no, trust us. This is not going to be like that. Like, everything about it is like, hey, they're going to do a comedy again.
Yeah. Like the guy who made Pee Wee Herman and Beetlejuice, like you wouldn't expect that it was going to be the sort of dark and somewhat serious, although, you know,
it's not that serious. But
the pendulum from Batman 66, the pendulum is sort of swung in this direction. But when you know that we're going to get the Batman and Batman versus Superman, it's sort of like, okay, no, this is actually not as serious as it's going to get, which is, if
not just serious, but self-serious.
Yeah, exactly, which is another whole kettle of fish. But
yeah, interesting. And then like the weird thing is, like, of course, in the 90s, you get kind of the mashup between this and the Tim Burton Batman in like the Schumacher version, where it's like, it's kind of both.
I mean, he has said they went too far with Burton, so he came in being like, we're going to go back to Adam West Batman. Like that
which is so like, not to go too far on a tangent, but it's so fascinating because then there are all of the, like, now there's all this conversation around Batman Forever and how there's actually like a serious version of that movie out there. And that, like,
which I have a memory of. No, there is. There's like this version where you're constantly hearing his journal entries. And I feel like I've seen a version. There's
definitely
big bat that's constantly coming towards
there
him.
is a fan edit, and there's been like stuff that has come out over the last couple of years where like that movie was a darker, more serious, but like when you watch the finished product, you're like, how this movie is so
like,
absurd.
It was cut for a reason. It's so like outside of what they're trying to accomplish with the movie.
Totally. I mean, like, that sounds dreadful. I don't want that movie to be serious. I like that movie.
Yeah, I know you do.
No, I'm probably alone.
No, I like it too. But when I rewatched it last year, I was kind of like, I mean, it's not as good as I thought it was, but I do still like it.
And then Batman and Robin feels like it's a reaction to the reaction, where it's like, okay, we're gonna double down on the campiness. And it just like, and it damn near killed the franchise.
And the toyification of it all.
Another one where they're like, we need so many different villains.
Okay, well, that brings us to the verdict. So, do the strengths outweigh the weaknesses? Daniel, would you recommend this movie?
No, I would definitely just tell people to watch the TV show.
Fair enough.
Nate, how about you?
Yeah, I think I gotta agree that like the TV show is definitely the superior version of this Batman. But it's kind of like what you were saying, Adam. It's like, if you just want like a little taste, because it's like, it's a commitment to like rewatch the show. If someone could give you like a few key episodes or like, you know, pairs of episodes to watch, like that would be a good way to get a little taste. But if you just want to like be like, oh yeah, I want to like watch Adam West, you know, screw around as Batman for a little while, this will do that. But it's not great, and particularly the villains really don't get to live up to their full potential in this.
Yeah, as much as we've been shitting on this movie, I do think the villains are the best performances in the movie. Like, they don't necessarily get the best stuff to do, but like they are really good. And Lee Merriweather, she only gets to do this once. I think she's excellent in this movie.
Sure,
but
she's so good. I thought she was in the show too.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
3 women got to do the show.
Yeah. So, like, because I watched this so much as a kid, like in my mind, I was like, yeah, she's one of the Catwomen, but she's not. This film, okay, so it's interesting. I have a very interesting relationship with this because I have a great deal of nostalgia, and rewatching it, much like the movies that I know like the back of my hand, like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where it's like I can quote the line 5 seconds before the line's going to happen.
We are the knights who say, me,
Neat.
I was surprised to discover that this is one of those movies that, like, because again, haven't watched it in probably 25 years, but I watched it so much as a kid, it's buried back there, and I was like, I know what's coming next. I know what's coming next. But I found it really boring and not particularly entertaining. To be perfectly honest, because I said to Nate, I was like, okay, I'll rewatch it with the commentary. Like, even just trying to rewatch this movie a second time in the last month, like, it's like every time I sat down to do it, I was like, oh, this is going to be a chore. Like, I don't want to watch this again, which I can't.
And it's not even 2 hours, but it feels long.
Oh, it feels like.
Yeah.
It really does. It doesn't feel as long as Police Academy, which I said to Nate is an 80-minute movie that took me 3.5 hours to watch. But it definitely, it's a bit of a slog. So
a good counterpoint to Camp, because Police Academy is just so bad it's bad.
Yeah, 100%. But there's a comfort in that, knowing that it's like, okay, the other movies I have nostalgia for and like, it's not just the nostalgia. They're just actually good movies. Like, this is a movie that I have nostalgia for, but I don't think is very good. Which is all to say that, no, I don't think I would necessarily recommend this. Like, I think you're right. Like, watch, like, one pair of the, like, I don't know, because I don't know the show well enough, but, like...
One pairing, I'm pretty sure it's, like, one of the first episodes, which blew my mind that they would start the series like this, is the Riddler has a plan where he gets Batman to catch him robbing, like, a jewelry, like, installation.
Okay.
And then calls the cops because he's like, this guy isn't even a cop and he's beating me up. And Batman goes to jail. And I'm just like, I don't like. Wow. I feel like that's the end. Like, he found out. He found out how to stop Batman.
Yeah.
Hey, police! This guy's beating me up. I'm like, he's just another citizen, and that's obviously where they start deputizing him.
Right.
Oh, like to me, that's the best plan ever that a Batman villain has ever had. Just involve the police immediately.
That's hilarious.
And
okay.
Batman
there
gets sent to jail.
Yeah, so that would be my recommendation.
Well, and you don't get any Vincent Price in this, so find those Egghead.
That's true. Yeah, find the Egghead episodes.
Dig into those.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say that after watching it, I did pull up my iTunes Price Watcher and put a price watch on the complete Batman 66 series, so that, like, if it ever drops to like $20, I will 100% buy it so that I can binge watch it at a later point. But on that note, I mean, we've kind of alluded to this. Daniel, as extra credit, is there something you would recommend? It doesn't have to be Batman related, or it can be, but like something else you would either pair with this movie or maybe recommend people watch instead of this movie?
That's a good question.
Well,
you know what? I would pair it with that Michael Jai White movie, Black Dynamite.
Oh, okay.
It's like, it's I know it's different time periods. That's 70s, this is 60s, but I do think they both traffic in the being in on the joke and a very specific delivery. And obviously this was made in the 60s, but you see the limitations in both of the movies, even though one is made in the 2000s.
Right.
But yeah, I would pair it with Black Dynamite.
Interesting.
Because at least you'll have a fun time laughing at the jokes there. I think Black Dynamite's a better movie and a more successful one, but I would still pair them together.
I love that. Shit. That's such a good call. Adam, what about you? Is there a movie that comes to mind for you that you'd think about as a double feature with this?
This maybe seems a little left field, but it's again sort of based on my understanding of what I think camp is. And I would recommend the movie Grease, because to me that feels very much in that like campy, like tongue-in-cheek,
I would agree
which
with
again, as a kid, when I first watched Grease, I didn't realize it was a pastiche or a parody or whatever you want to call it of those sort of like 50s morals and like the morality plays, and like he famously was like, it has a terrible message, like if a boy doesn't like you, change. And it's like, yeah, that's the joke, Adam. Like the joke is that the message is terrible. Like that's the point. Another one, which is also like I feel like kind of plays into all this, is Austin Powers, which is very much is more parody than it is, but it is like, it's definitely got campy elements, and it's playing up the sort of like 60s stuff that obviously Batman 66 traffics in. That is a movie that I loved as a kid. I still love as an adult. I rewatched it like maybe 5 years ago, and just, again, I know it like the back of my hand. It's one of the, like, I owned it on VHS. I watched it all the time. So I just like, I have a lot of love for it, but it's one of those ones where I'm like, is it the nostalgia talking, or is it just that it's a really good movie? And I know Nate disagrees with me, but I think it's just actually a really funny movie. So,
well, I remember really liking it at the time, but then I rewatched it recently and was like, oh no, I don't like this anymore.
Yeah, see, I do.
I still like it.
But again,
Yeah,
I also have a very different relationship with the quote unquote source material, like being a lifelong James Bond fan. Like, so I think that's part of it too. And like also like the Avengers and all those other like spy things from the 60s that I just loved as a kid. So
it's funny, we all went in the similar direction of like not Batman, but camp, right? And the one that came to mind for me was Barbie.
Oh yeah.
Which I think is also really trafficking in this same kind of humor. The exaggeration, the sort of like really over the top world, the kind of intentionally stilted acting, you know, but that is actually like really hard to do well.
Yeah.
Like the
Agreed.
thing,
Yeah.
you know, there was that whole discourse about Greta Gerwig not being nominated for Best Director, right? I know, of course, like it's a great movie and the director should be recognized for a great movie, but like most importantly, the tone of that movie is what makes it work, right? And it was really her job, first and foremost, to make sure that every actor, all of the production design, every detail of that movie kind of fit together into a tone. And like, that's the reason why I feel like she should have been nominated.
Oh, I agree.
But yeah, it does actually remind me a lot when I thought about it of the sort of Batman TV series. It's kind of poking fun in a loving way at this piece of IP, right? That we have a complicated relationship with, and maybe the only way to do a movie about it now is to be a little tongue in cheek about it, right?
Totally.
But yeah, and then there are lots of Batman movies that you can watch, right?
I mean, Michael Jai White, a big part of Dark Knight, so it's still in the area. Margot Robbie is also
and
in
if
a
you
movie
want
with
to
Batman.
if you want to hear Nate and I deconstruct some Batman movies, this is my way of segueing. You can check out Daniel's podcast, right? Daniel?
Yeah, please do. It's Spoiled Rotten. We're on all the podcast things. So yeah, just search Spoiled Rotten podcast. I do think there's another Spoiled Rotten on there, kind of like the Flynn Springfield thing. They haven't put an episode out in years. I don't even think we were doing the same thing. But yeah, Spoiled Rotten podcast, if you search that, and we're on the same podcast network, that shelf.
Yeah, we are.
So if you go there, you'll see both of our shows there.
Was that last summer that we were on? I can't remember. It's been a while.
It was the summer. Well, we also had a big gap between recording and releasing.
That's true. Yeah. So, but yeah, I talked about Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which I think is one of the better Batman films.
And a good tie-in for the Tim Burton episode that we'll be doing next. And I did Lego Batman, which is actually a pretty good tie-in to this episode in a lot of ways, because it's playing in the same territory of like, which Batman are we talking about? Are we talking about the Adam West Batman? Are we talking about the Tim Burton Batman, or the really super serious new Batman? You know, like
I gotta rewatch that. I only saw it the one time when we saw it in theaters, and I remember not loving it, which.
Oh man,
revisiting it made me like it a lot more.
Yeah, because I loved Batman in the Lego movie, and I wanted more of that. And then like the movie was a little bit different. And so, anyway, I really should go back and revisit it, because I mean, Will Arnett is so good.
Yeah, and now that we've been having this conversation, I think you'll appreciate it even more, because it's talking about all the same stuff.
Totally. Daniel, is there anything you want to plug outside of your podcast?
I do have another podcast that people can listen to. It's called Uncolonized Podcast. I've got a link in my bio on all social media. So I'm at The Young Guard on Twitter. I'm not going to say the other name. And on Instagram, I'm just at Young Guard. You don't have to put the YUNGGUARD. So yeah, you can follow me on social media, or just look at it and not follow, and just go to the to the different links for the two podcasts that I'm on currently.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was great having a fellow batsman, bat aficionado to join us for this episode. And obviously, you know, being on the same podcast network, it's always nice to like plug each other's stuff. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll be back on your show. I think we agreed that we were going to come back on to talk about Batman and Robin, which thought
you were doing Batman and Robin.
Yeah, the thought of me having to sit through that movie again is
look, I'm looking forward to the conversation with you two. I don't know how much I'm going to enjoy sitting through it because I think it's one of the longer ones too. I don't.
Yeah. I love having conversations with Adam where I get to put him through a painful movie experience.
He really does.
With him,
yeah.
So.
But I'm gonna definitely sit down with a bottle of wine to watch that movie.
There you go.
Because I don't think I'm gonna get through it. Truthfully, like what I should do is like force Nate to fly up to Canada and watch it with me, like in the same room, so I could just like punch him every 5 minutes to be like, "Why are you making me watch this stupid thing?" Well, that brings us to the end of this episode, but not to the end of our Bat conversation, because next episode we will be continuing our Bat journey and looking at the film that is very much a response and recalibration of this film and TV series, Tim Burton's 1989 classic, Batman. Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us. It was really a pleasure having you on here.
This was great.
And thank you, humble listener, for joining us for another episode of the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans that may or may not have been done before by Flim Springfield, but that's fine. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave us a review and share this episode with the Simpson fans and film buffs in your life. And in the meantime, tune in next week. Same Plex time, same Plex channel. Nate?
We'll see you around the Plex.
See you around the Plex. Did you like that? That was that's what we call a reference. That's what we call in the biz, a reference to the Batman television program.
No, that was great. I was like, yes, they're doing it.
Yeah, of course we're doing it. But because we don't air every week, I had to do next week.
Yeah.
So.
I caught on to the two next.
Thank you. Yep. I just I always like to get my chapeaus as they so rarely come, so I have to, even if I have to ask for them.
Will tonight be the night that Bruce reveals himself to the magnificent Miranda? I never met a girl like you before, Miranda. And I'd do anything for you if you just ask. Miranda. Ask me to do anything for you, Miranda. But please don't ask me to remove my mask. It's against the code of heroes. But you know how much I love you, darling, so come into my kingdom. Boy Genius, what are you doing here?
Bruce, come right away. There's a job to be done. A giant octopus has run amok in Washington.
Boy Genius, this is one time you'll have to go it alone. Would you like to see me make my muscles dance, Miranda? Miranda! For someone powerful as me, it's no big task. Miranda! Ask me to do anything for you, Miranda. But please don't ask me to remove my mask. It's attached to my special super thermal V nuclear long underwear. But don't think I've forgotten my promise. Tonight, I'm going to kiss you.
Bruce, something terrible has happened. Mr. AC/DC, the electric brain, has threatened to turn off the electric current all over the... See what I mean?
Holy Sherlock Holmes, Boy Genius, you're becoming a real stick in the mud. You better zoom right out of here. Oh, I can see the hurt look on your face, Miranda. Miranda. So I'm gonna do the little thing you ask. Miranda. Come take a peek, a teeny weeny peek, Miranda. Get ready now while I remove my mask. There, darling. What do you think?
Oh, please, put it back.
Drat! I never met a girl like you before, Miranda.